So far this season, there have been lots of surprises. There have been lots of players who have been better than expected and players who have been a lot worse than expected. And today I'm going to be looking at each team's most disappointing player up to this point. So pretty simple concept here, now let's hop right into the video. Getting things started off with the Diamondbacks, I have Mark Melancon. Melancon was picked up by Arizona this offseason from San Diego, where he was expected to be their 9th inning guy. But so far, he's been far from what Arizona was expecting, as in 15 innings pitched, he has a 7.04 ERA. And Melancon's at that point in his career where I can't confidently say he's going to bounce back and pitch much better than he has so far. Moving on to the Atlanta Braves, I have Charlie Morton. Ever since winning the World Series with Houston a few years back, Morton has had a late career resurgence. But this year, it looks like his age is starting to get to him. So far in 44 innings pitched, he has a 5.28 ERA. He just looks like a completely different pitcher than we've seen over the past couple of years, but even with his age, I'm still pretty confident that Charlie Morton can pick things up and be much better than he has so far. Moving on to the Baltimore Orioles, I have Ryan Mountcastle. This one was pretty tough to pick because really there hasn't been too many disappointing players on Baltimore. And in reality, Mountcastle really hasn't been too disappointing, as so far he's hitting .256 with 5 home runs. But I only say he's a little disappointing because the 5 home runs so far are well below pace of his 33 he hit last year. So Mountcastle really hasn't been very disappointing, but I would just say the home runs have been a little underwhelming up to this point. Getting on to the Boston Red Sox, I have Bobby Dalbec. Dalbec broke through last year where he had 25 home runs and looked like he could be a very good power threat for Boston moving forward. But so far this year, things haven't gone as planned. He's only hitting .162 with 1 home run this year. So Dalbec really wasn't expected to be a superstar for Boston this year, but they were expecting much more than what he's given them so far. Moving on to the Chicago White Sox, I have Yasmani Grandal. Grandal has been a huge disappointment this year as he's only hitting .162 to go along with 2 home runs and a negative 1.1 WAR. Grandal was arguably the best catcher of 2021 and he hasn't even looked close to that this year. Now, one reason for optimism with Grandal is that he has historically been a slow starter, so I really do think he will pick things up as time goes on, but you can't deny that he's been a very big disappointment so far. Getting on to the Chicago Cubs, I have Kyle Hendricks. Hendricks has never really been a huge strikeout guy, but he's definitely been one of Chicago's most reliable pitchers over the past 5 years. But this year he hasn't been reliable at all, as in 54 innings he has a 5.2 ERA. And over the past couple years, Hendricks has progressively gotten a little bit worse every year, so I'm not too sure if Hendricks will pick things up this year for Chicago. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Reds, where I'm going with Tyler Mahle. Mahle is coming off a career year last year in which he had 33 starts where he had a 3.75 ERA. And heading into this year, Mahle was again expected to produce for Cincinnati as he's currently 27 years old, so he's really in the middle of his prime. But so far he's looked like the exact opposite as he did last year, as in 47 innings pitched he has a 6.32 ERA. Mahle has been one of many big disappointments for Cincinnati so far this year. I really hope he does pick it up because, like I said, he's in the middle of his prime, and last year he looked like a very good pitcher. Getting on to the Cleveland Guardians, I have Franmil Reyes. I did almost go with Aaron Savali here, but ultimately went with Reyes because Cleveland is very reliant on Reyes to produce this year. After hitting 30 home runs last year, he was expected to produce yet again this year and be a very good source of power for Cleveland. But so far, he hasn't been close to what he looked like in 2021, as he's currently hitting .195 to go along with 3 home runs. I really am hoping Reyes can pick it up because Cleveland, like I said, is very reliant on him to produce this year because outside of Jose Ramirez, they don't have very many offensive options. Next up, we have the Colorado Rockies, and I'm going with German Marquez. Coming into this year, Marquez was the clear-cut ace of Colorado's rotation. He's been a bit up and down over the past couple years, but overall he's been a very solid pitcher. But this year, he has been atrocious. So far in 50 innings, he has a 6.3 ERA. There's no doubt he's been the most disappointing player on Colorado, and in my opinion, he's been one of the most disappointing players in all of baseball. Getting on to the Tigers, I have Javier Baez. This is Baez's first year in Detroit after signing a 6-year, $140 million contract this offseason. So obviously with a contract paying him that well, he's going to be expected to produce. But up to this point, he's done everything but produce, as he's hit .204 with only 3 home runs. And I know Baez has been known to be a pretty streaky hitter, so maybe he will pick things up as time goes on and live up to the contract. Moving on to the Houston Astros, I have Yuli Gurriel. The Astros as a whole have been playing very well up to this point, so it was a little hard to pick a disappointment. But I ultimately went with Gurriel as he's been very disappointing this year. He hit .319 back in 2021, but this year he's only hitting .224 to go along with 3 home runs. And Gurriel is 37 years of age, so you can't be expecting too much out of him, but there's no doubt he's been a disappointment up to this point. Getting on to the Kansas City Royals, I have Carlos Hernandez. Hernandez broke through last year where he had a 3.68 ERA and really looked like he could be a solid piece for Kansas City this year. But up to this point, he has looked like one of the worst pitchers in all of baseball. So far in 30 innings, Hernandez has a 9.1 ERA. So Hernandez has been a massive disappointment for Kansas City so far, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him sent down to the minor leagues in the near future. Getting on to the Los Angeles Angels, I have Anthony Rendon. Now, Rendon hasn't necessarily been too bad this year, but he definitely isn't the player he once was. So far, he's hitting .242 with 5 home runs. And he just doesn't look like the same Anthony Rendon we saw with Washington back in 2019. On top of that, he has a pretty massive contract, so I think he's definitely been a big disappointment up to this point. Getting on to the LA Dodgers, I have Max Muncy. Over the past couple seasons, Muncy has really broken through and established himself as one of the Dodgers' most important offensive bats. But this year, he's taken a big downturn as he's only hitting .150 to go along with 3 home runs. It's just extremely shocking to see Muncy play so bad considering he had 36 home runs last year and finished 10th in the NL MVP voting. So as bad as Muncy is playing, with how good he's been recently, I do think he's going to pick things up and eventually get back to his normal self. Moving on to the Miami Marlins, I have Trevor Rogers. Rogers had an impressive rookie campaign in 2021 as he had a 2.64 ERA, was named to the All-Star team, and finished second in the National League Rookie of the Year voting. So expectations were very high heading into 2022. But so far, he has not lived up to the hype as in 36 innings, he has a 5+ ERA. He just hasn't been able to get any consistency out there on the mound, but with how good he was last year, I have to think he's going to pick things up and be a little bit better than he has so far. Moving on to the Milwaukee Brewers, I have Brandon Woodruff. Over the past couple years, Woodruff has really been one of the best starting pitchers in all of baseball. Last year, he had a 2.56 ERA and came close to winning the National League Cy Young Award. But this year, he's looked like a completely different pitcher as in 40 innings pitched, he has a 4.76 ERA. But I am confident that Woodruff will pick things up because he has shown flashes of his 2021 self this year, so I do think he will pick things up in the near future. Moving on to the Minnesota Twins, I have Carlos Correa. Correa really hasn't been awful this year, but for his standards, he hasn't been great. So far, he's hitting .280 with only 2 home runs. And when you consider he finished top 5 in the AL MVP voting last year, it's been a big disappointment. But I do think Correa is going to pick things up. I don't think he's going to be quite as good as he was last year, but I do think he's going to be a lot better than he has up to this point. Moving on to the New York Yankees, I have Joey Gallo. So far, Gallo has been a big disappointment as he's only hitting .165 to go along with 5 home runs. And I know Gallo has never been a great contact hitter, but just watching Yankee games, you will see how bad Gallo has looked. He's coming off a season where he had 38 home runs, was named to the All-Stars team, and also won a Gold Glove, and it's clear that he's not been the same as he was last year. The Yankees as a whole have been amazing, but there's no doubt Gallo has been their one big disappointment. Getting on to the New York Mets, I have Eduardo Escobar. The Mets are another team that has been very good all around, and it was pretty tough to pick a disappointing player. But I did go with Escobar because I think he's been a little bit disappointing this season considering he's only hitting .229 to go along with 2 home runs. Last year he did hit 28 home runs and was a very important piece for Milwaukee down the stretch. And as time goes on, I do think Escobar will pick things up and look a lot like his former self because he did recently have a 4-hit game and has all around looked a lot better lately. Next up I have the Oakland A's and I'm going with Ramon Laureano. Laureano recently returned from his PED suspension and he has been very bad. He's hitting .173 and has yet to hit a home run this season. Prior to his suspension in 2021, he did have some good power and speed as he had 14 home runs and 12 stolen bases in 88 games. But it's looking more and more like the only reason Laureano was playing that well was because of the PEDs. So time will only tell if Laureano is actually a solid major league player or if it was just the PEDs. Moving on to the Philadelphia Phillies, I have JT Realmuto. For the Phillies, it was tough to pick a disappointing player because I really don't think there has been too many disappointments. But Realmuto is only hitting .240 to go along with 3 home runs up to this point. And it's definitely not awful, but it's definitely not what we've seen from Realmuto over the past couple seasons. Getting on to the Pittsburgh Pirates, I have Brian Reynolds. Coming into this year, Reynolds was looked at the clear-cut best player on Pittsburgh. He's coming off a season in which he had 24 home runs and finished 11th in the National League MVP voting. But so far, he's looked like a completely different player as he's only hitting .216 to go along with 5 home runs. The power is definitely still there. The 5 home runs isn't all that bad, but you would definitely expect him to hit a lot better than .216. Getting on to the San Diego Padres, I have Trent Grisham. Grisham so far has been extremely underwhelming as he's only hitting .157 to go along with 1 home run. And to be honest, last year was a pretty big disappointment for Grisham as well, as expectations were very high and he disappointed, so this year was really a chance for him to bounce back and show that he was a very good player. And I did believe in him. I thought he was going to have a bounce back campaign this year and be very good, but I was very wrong. San Diego as a whole has been very good this year, but Grisham has no doubt been a big disappointment. Moving on to the San Francisco Giants, I have Brandon Crawford. Crawford is coming off a career year in which he finished 4th in the National League MVP voting. He hit .298 with 24 home runs as he was clearly one of the best options on the best team in baseball. But this year, Crawford has fallen back to earth. So far, he's hitting .223 to go along with 4 home runs. And there's no doubt Crawford's still a very important player for San Francisco, but his numbers have definitely been underwhelming. So Crawford is definitely a good player, but I don't think he's going to get back to last year's numbers. Getting on to the Seattle Mariners, I have Jared Kelenic. Kelenic was called up last year as a rookie and was one of the top prospects in baseball, but he massively underperformed. But as bad as he was last year, there was still lots of hope that Kelenic was going to bounce back in 2022. But this year he looks like the same player as he did in 2021 as he hit .140 to go along with 3 home runs and he's currently in the minor leagues. Once a top prospect in all of baseball, Kelenic is starting to make people wonder whether he's ever going to live up to the hype. Next up we have the St. Louis Cardinals, and I'm going with Steven Matz. Matz is by no means an ace, but he's definitely been underwhelming. So far in 37 innings pitched, he has a 6+ ERA. So even as a back end of the rotation pitcher, Matz was expected to be a lot better than a 6 ERA. He was recently shut down with a shoulder injury, so maybe the shoulder injury was affecting Matt's play on the field. But there's no doubt on the field he's been very, very disappointing. Getting on to the Tampa Bay Rays, I have Mike Zunino. Zunino has never been a great contact hitter, but this year he's been even worse than expected. He's hitting .158 to go along with 4 home runs, which is a lot worse than the .216 33 home run campaign he put up last year. So like I said, Zunino's not expected to hit for the best average in the world, but even a .158 average is disappointing for his standards. Moving on to the Texas Rangers, I have Marcus Semien. Semien, in my opinion, has been the single most disappointing player in all of baseball. After a career year in 2021 where he hit 45 home runs and finished 3rd in the AL MVP voting, he signed a 7-year, $175 million deal with Texas. So obviously, Semien was expected to play like a superstar. But so far, he's been everything but a superstar as he's currently hitting .181 and has yet to hit a home run in Texas. It's just been an all-around disappointing season for Semien, and I really do hope he picks things up because I kinda like him as a player. Next up, I have the Toronto Blue Jays, and I'm going with Jose Barrios. Barrios is coming off a great 2021 where he had a 3.52 ERA. And overall, he's been a very good pitcher throughout his major league career. So this year he was expected to produce for Toronto, but unfortunately he hasn't been very good this year as he's had a 4.75 ERA. It's definitely been a big disappointment so far for Barrios, who has been one of the most underwhelming pitchers in the American League. And the last team in today's video, I have the Washington Nationals, where I'm going with Patrick Corbin. This was really a tough one to pick because as bad as the Nationals have been, they really haven't had too many disappointing players. Corbin has progressively gotten worse over the past couple seasons, and it's clear he's not the pitcher he once was. But considering he has a 6.3 ERA in his first 50 innings this year, it's definitely been a letdown. As for the rest of the season, I really don't have too much confidence in Corbin because, like I said, over the past couple years, he's just gotten worse and worse. So there you have my most disappointing player for every team up to this point. Let me know what you guys think down below, any players you agree on or any players you think I missed out on. As always, if you guys do enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to continue to post a lot more videos here as we go further into 2022. And lastly, I want to thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.